Well, good morning, church. Thank you for joining us for our daily Devo. Today we're in Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 through 12. And we're going to focus on 7 through 11, where Jesus talks about prayer. Remember, this is the second time Jesus has talked about prayer in the Sermon on the Mount. The first time he talks more about the how-to of prayer and even gives what we call the Lord's Prayer, which is not something to be repeated, but something that is an outline for how we can pray. Well, now he delves into what I think is really the attitude when it comes to prayer. Now, I think to understand this, first we have to understand our context. In the time in which Christ lived, prayer was important and prayer was celebrated. I mean, the Pharisees were known to be able to pray and people had time to pray. It was a commitment and they didn't have the rush that we have. See, our days are so packed. We wake up behind schedule. An alarm gets up telling us we better wake up, and then instantly we'll cut on our phone. We'll have the TV on, we're eating breakfast, or we're surfing the net. In the car, we're listening to our radios. At home, we have all this hitting us. And for us just to spend a short time of prayer can be a challenge. And I think what Jesus addresses here is a challenge for us to understand prayer isn't simply a monologue to God, but prayer is something to be deeper. And he tells three things about prayer that we are to be asking, seeking, and knocking. Each three of those are similar, but I think they're also enough different that we need to understand them to really understand what Jesus is saying. First, he says ask. That's pretty straightforward. That's kind of vocalizing a request or a need. That's just basically going before God with your needs, not assuming he's going to meet them. It means when you see a need, you pray, God, meet that need. Therefore, you can say, God, thank you for meeting my daily needs. When you see the needs for others, you can ask, but it's just simply, here's a need, asking God for it. Then he talks about seeking. Seeking kind of implies more of a process, more of a struggle. Maybe it's not a prayer that's instantly answered. Maybe it's trying to understand a direction God is giving you, trying to understand something happening in your life, kind of struggling through some challenges, maybe looking at his word and trying to understand how it applies to our life. But it is that seeking out truth, seeking out that connection to God. And then the last one, knocking, really has to do with persistence. That we aren't to one and done. We aren't to just bring this to God or throw it and say it's over, but we are to go again and again until that need is met. Remember in Luke where the parable of prayer is given and Christ talks about the friend who had a need for bread. His friend shows up and there's no bread. And I guess you could say he almost asks himself, do I have the bread? He doesn't. So then he remembers that he has a friend who's baked bread. And so he seeks out the friend. But he didn't just seek him out, he knocks. He asks the friend, hey, I have a traveler who's come. I need to feed him. I don't have bread. You do. Can I have some bread? And, he's kind of pushed back at first. No, I'm in bed with my kids. Go away. But we see the knocking, persistence. He keeps knocking and knocking and knocking. And finally, the man comes and gives him the bread. He says, not because you're a friend, because basically you won't stop knocking. And then God says we are to pray that way. See, when it comes to our prayer with God, are we persistent? Are we knocking? See, we need to bring the request. Yeah, we need to struggle through certain things, but do we knock until there's an answer? See, I think God answers. He can meet the need, as he did with the friend who was given bread. Or it could be like Paul, when he has a thorn in the flesh and he can't understand why in the world God, who used Paul to heal others, wouldn't heal Paul. Until finally, Christ tells him, listen, this is given so that you'll have my power, so you won't be prideful. You can lean on me. And Paul gets it. He even says, much more will I glorify God in my weakness, because when I'm weak, he is strong. So I want to challenge you, rather than making prayer that passing thing you do quickly, that you do before a meal, that you do just in a moment, let's develop the season of prayer. Even as Christ, we see in his life, it says early in the morning while it was still dark, he departs to a lonely place, and there he prays. Guys, we need to have lives reflected by prayer, because it's how we connect to God, it's how we share our needs, and it's how God develops in that process of spiritual growth. So it's a challenge to me. I hope it's a challenge to you. So let's continue. Tomorrow on our Daily Devo, we're continuing to go through the great content in the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm so glad you're on this journey with us.